people who have done this and with the correct perspective, and by that I mean freeing the mind of prejudice and freeing the mind of fear, that what is normally pervaded as the reality of these ET events is really so much not what's really happening. And I think that it's very important for people to understand that in fact there's a very different reality to the actual extraterrestrial presence than what's usually presented in videos and books on the subject, which is also very scary. That these civilizations are very, very advanced and enlightened and completely non-hostile. And we have had this kind of close contact all over the world for almost 20 years, 19 years, and we have never had anything but the most wonderful experiences. And they're actually, if anything, very gentle about if someone is upset or is becoming frightened because the craft is coming too close or the event is becoming too intense. They actually back off and stop. This is very different from the man-made ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, and the man-made abductions, which are, thought to be ET, but they're not. They're actually man-made events that are being used to scare the hell out of people because they want people to be afraid. Fear sells books and videos, but also fear also gives you the justification for spending trillions of dollars in weapons in space and spending trillions of dollars in a centralized global military junta that eventually people could bend their knee before the great, savior of militarism in facing this new reality of ETs that are here. And this is why you hear almost exclusively on, if the subject comes up on CNN or in the news or a new book or a new movie, it's almost always something terrifying because the people I know in Hollywood and in the news media will let you know that the kind of message we're putting out isn't allowed to get out because they want people to be brainwashed with fear. And the worst is all the New Age community who believe there's the good aliens and the bad aliens and the this and the that. They basically have taken the whole mythology of that and believed it because it's something that is what's vogue and in the conventional wisdom. But the reality is that if there was a hostile civilization out there capable of traveling at multiples of the speed of light, it would be all over already. I mean, there would not be any opportunity for there to be the kinds of silliness we're doing now where we're using advanced electromagnetic weapon systems to target and hit these ET craft. Now, that brings me to another discussion. There's a man who is an Air Force officer who had been down at this base, Eglin Air Force Base on the coast of Florida, the Gulf Coast, south of where we were located. And he informed me that there were, for a number of those years, a electromagnetic pulse weapon that was hooked to a radar system that would track these ET craft, both from space but also land. And this was a land-based system. It looked like giant horseshoes, great big, huge electromagnetic pulse generators. And he saw them. He actually photographed them and sent me information about them. I don't know, they're somewhere in my files. But they were on this remote stretch of beach near Eglin Air Force Base. And he said those had been used to target these ET vehicles when they were fully materialized and very vulnerable due to their electronics and electromagnetic propulsion, because they're not using normal jet propulsion, of course. And actually, he said they hit a few of them where it hit them, and it disabled them. They dropped directly into the water of the Gulf of Mexico.
Wow. Which explains why they very often appear to us in the astral form, so are not readily visible to most onlookers.
Yes, and this is interesting because even back then, now this of course would have been as I mentioned almost 18 years ago in March. there was this program that was targeting these ET craft, and unfortunately, this is I tell people that until we get the president and the United Nations and other countries to get a hold of this issue and deal with it properly and restrain these rogue black projects from behaving this way, it's going to be a very difficult situation. That CSETI is a citizens diplomatic effort making contact, but within the context of an out-of-control, unsupervised, illegal, but very powerful group of people who have weaponry where they have been targeting ET craft and successfully hitting them. And this is why part of our protocol is that we always ask the ETs to appear only in a way that is safe and appropriate for this time and place. That's almost a mantra because we repeat it over and over again. So we want to make it very clear that we don't want them to take any great risks, that if they need to stay in a dematerialized form and where it's just some kind of an energetic field or tonal event or even a remote view event, that we're happy with that. And that if they fully materialize and are present, to do so only if it is completely safe to do so, and they've evaluated the environment to see if there are any of these kind of weapon systems that are going to be targeting them. And this is not a matter of just my opinion, by the way. There are many people who have come forward talking about this kind of behavior, and even if you look at disclosureproject.org, you will see that there are testimonies of people, for example, who were at the working right at the right hand of the Commander-in-Chief Atlantic Command, the four-star admiral, running out of the Virginia Beach area in Norfolk, Hampton Roads area, when in the early 80s we had a craft come in off the eastern seaboard, and his first order was to scramble jets and order it downed, and to do what he could to down this object. And so, because it was fully materialized, and it was on at least 5 different radar systems. The jets were scrambled all the way from Oceania up and down the East Coast. And this top-secret witness, Merle Shane McDowell, that's in the disclosureproject.org materials, described the fact that this admiral was very upset, Harry Train, Admiral Train, and that he had ordered this thing down. So this is the kind of behavior, not only here, but if you look at the famous 76 case over Iran, the Shah's Air Force at that time had ordered, there was this massive ET craft out over the desert, and they had scrambled jets, and they scrambled the jets and gave orders to fire. And the pilots tried to fire their missiles. I believe they were F-16s, and the ETs just rendered all the electronics inoperable, so they could not fire those missiles. But this kind of insane and reckless and stupid behavior, galactic stupidity, to use a term, is something that goes on to this day, except that within the classified world of Majestic, the so-called Majestic group, they have weapon systems that are all trans-dimensional electronic, so-called scalar weapon systems, and they are targeting the ET craft. And this is why in the 50s, not that it was common, but you frequently heard of these craft fully materializing and landing. You hear of that less today, or if they do fully materialize, it's transient, and it's because of the weapon systems that have been developed between the 50s and the 90s that are now fully operational, both in space but also that are land-based, that are targeting ET craft. So the reason I point this out to people is that if you do this, you can try this at home, unlike what the commercials say. But if you do it at home, you should do it with this awareness that there's no place on the globe. It doesn't matter if you're in the Amazon jungle of South America. In fact, one of our witnesses was at a post on the Bolivian-Peruvian border in the middle of nowhere when one of these Star Wars weapon systems targeted one of these small ET craft, and they hit it, and it crashed right near the Peruvian-Bolivian border, and he was, along with his commander, the first person to get there to the crash site. And this is in the disclosureproject.org. If you go to disclosureproject.org, there's videotapes and also books of the accounts of these kinds of military men that have come forward to tell these kinds of accounts. And so that happened in 1993, I believe, or early 90s. So the point I'm making is that this is something that's an ongoing problem that goes across many decades, and so you have to factor that into what you're doing and be wise in the sense that going out and making contact does not mean that they're going to be puppets on a string and appear fully materialized. They may appear in a dematerialized form. They may appear as an energy field that you see very subtly. They may appear as a tone that comes into your contact site, or a brilliant light that flashes above you, and then it's totally dematerialized. There are 1,000. Literally, when I say 1,000, there's probably more than 1,000 different things that we have seen of how these ET craft materialize. And yet, we continue to have them appear fully materialized, like we did, by the way, if you go to CSETI.org, when we were at Rio Rico, a number of people saw this, but not everyone. But directly above us, we have a photograph of this complex sort of tetrahedral-shaped object, semi-materializing in this photograph that Raven Nabulsi took directly above us one night when we were out making contact, where we were having a number of very strange things happen in the sky. And I think that, you can go to CSETI.org and see this photograph. It's really quite amazing. And so what I encourage people to do is if you read this book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, you're going to have an understanding of all the subtle and nuanced ways that these ET craft appear, which can go from a completely materialized spacecraft, like you can kick the tires on them if they had tires, to things that are much more subtle, where they're dematerialized and still in the sort of etheric energy field, but are visible if you learn how to see with that sort of subtle vision, or with electronic devices that will go off, where they will begin to interact through the electronics, which actually began happening very early on these expeditions on occasion, and now it's happening all the time. It's just astonishing what's been happening in the last 2 years.